Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will be starting promptly in about a minute or so, so thank you for being here. Great. It is the top of the hour, so we are going to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to anyone joining us today. My name is Alan Dominguez, and on behalf of IDDSI Global, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar titled IDDSI Implementation and Culinary Q&A. We have a packed hour for you today. So before we begin, I just want to do some quick housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be shared on the IDDSI YouTube channel in the upcoming days. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we ask you to use that to submit your questions to the panelists, and we will be answering them throughout the session today. We do not offer CEUs for this session, and there are no disclosures from our panelists or presenters. And before I pass it over to our moderator, I just want to acknowledge the IDDSI supporters and sponsors who allow the work of IDDSI to continue worldwide, but they do not have any say on how we implement or the research that IDDSI conducts. Okay, and that is it for me. I'm going to welcome John Holohan, who is our moderator for today. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Alan, and welcome everybody. I'd ask the panelists to unmute themselves and turn on their cameras, and would ask Alan to stop sharing his slides so we have a nice panel here. And what we're going to do today, folks, is we will do a brief little introduction of each of our panelists, and we're going to end with somebody who's actually in the midst of an IDDSI implementation right now, so she has some practical tips and comments and things based on the current state of IDDSI implementation. And then hopefully we'll have about 45 minutes of questions. We had about eight or nine questions submitted ahead of time. And during this webinar, as Alan said, you can submit things through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So I'm your host, John Holohan. I am the founder of SimplyThick and the president of SimplyThick. As far as my IDDSI experience goes, I've been talking about IDDSI for more than a decade, ever since I first heard about it, because I understood right away how great this would be for the industry. But I have no real practical experience in terms of implementing it in a facility, so that's why they have me here moderating. And so I'm going to ask the panelists to give you a little introduction of themselves, and I'll pass it to Ruba to
Hi,
introduce herself.
everyone. Thank you so much, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruba. I am a registered dietitian and part of the healthcare menu and marketing team at Airmark Canada. My work focuses on Etsy testing and validation of texture modified recipes across senior living and healthcare settings. I support national menu development by ensuring all the textures and the pureed recipes meet our Etsy standards, while also strengthening their nutritional value, whether that was through fortification or even thoughtful ingredient selection. And beyond that technical testing, I'm also involved in menu planning and resident-focused marketing initiatives that can help build that choice and enjoyment in texture-modified dining as well. I see Etsy as a company-wide responsibility, and it's something that I would say very hard to navigate on your own for sure. And I see that Etsy is not a one-time rollout, but it's an ongoing journey that requires continuous refinement, feedback, and alignment across teams. And at a corporate level, since I do work in that, my role is really about creating that consistency without losing the practicality. to meet those Etsy requirements while still delivering on the flavor, the nutrition, and resident satisfaction, and also not to forget the operational feasibility for that. So for me, I think it's not just about compliance, it's also about giving sites or the sites the tools that they can realistically execute and feel confident about serving.
Thank you, Ruba. And Jenny?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Cook, and I am the corporate chef and culinary manager for Complete Purchasing Services. So my main role here, is also like Ruba. I am at a corporate level, but I develop recipes and menus for Complete. And back in 2018 was when we kind of decided to look at all of our recipes and see where we were sitting within the IDDSI framework. So I have been testing IDDSI recipes since 2018. And again, like John said, I'm at a corporate level, so I am testing and I am getting feedback from our clients. But I am also very focused because I am a Red Seal chef on making sure the recipes are not only compliant for IDDSI, but also, they taste good and the clients are getting the nutrition they need. So we, had thousands of recipes that we had already in place, and then we tested all those for IDDSI. And now when I'm developing new recipes, I am constantly testing to make sure everything falls within the framework. So it has been quite a long journey, and this is kind of why I'm really excited for this panel today, because I think it's great. We need to establish this community. There's a lot of information out there about theory and things like that, but back when I started testing, I didn't have a lot of people to reach out to about these kind of practical aspects. And obviously, even now, like, things are constantly changing with IDDSI still, right? And we're learning and we're developing things. But just to have a community of people where you can ask questions and reach out, what are you doing? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? And get ideas, because everyone's really got to do their own testing. And it's really going to depend on what kind of home you're in or where you work, what result you get. But I'm really excited about this because I think it's going to really create a great community of people to kind of lean on each other while everyone's going through their journey.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jenny. And now we're going to move to Natalie. And Natalie, you're going to introduce yourself and just give us a, 5-10 minute review of your current experience going through implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So my name is Natalie Naylor, and I am a registered dietitian. I work with the City of Toronto, and my role is a menu planner, which is really coordinating the resident menu. So we are in the midst of implementing a IDDSI menu with some slight modifications, which I'll go through with everyone. But it has been a journey, and it's been very interesting, and it's possible. I just want to reassure everyone it is possible. There are a lot of tools and resources out there, and I'm going to share our journey. So to give you all some highlights. So we have 10 homes. We have homes ranging from a little over 100 residents to over 400 residents. So more than 2,600 residents with different kitchens, different layouts, different challenges. So as John mentioned, our journey also started a few years back, pre-COVID, when IDDSI was first introduced, and we started to look at our equipment. So the first thing I wanted to really talk about is equipment. Equipment is really important for texture modified food because you want to make sure that if you're making a minced, for example, the particle size is the correct size. If you're making a pureed, what equipment are you going to use to make that puree to get it smooth enough? So that was our first aha moment. Check our equipment. So we looked at that, we got that set. Then came COVID. Well, that was difficult. Then post-COVID, we said, okay, let's go to fluids. Fluids were an easy implementation. We started with fluids. The next step was really the food. Everyone says, oh, fluids are easy. Let's start with fluids. But you really have to get to food eventually. So we attended the IDDSI festivals in Toronto. We came away all motivated and everything, and we said, okay, this is it. We've got to do it, and we have to look at it as a quality improvement project because really we're looking at improving our quality in terms of our textures. And there were two other external factors that were applying a bit of pressure to us. One was, if you're in Ontario, the RNAO clinical pathways. Those are nursing assessments. They're nursing driven, but they included IDDSI language for diets. So once it was there in a nursing assessment, we knew that there would be a disconnect if we didn't have those textures in the home. And the other one was the hospitals, because the hospitals had started to switch over to IDDSI textures. And we were getting admissions and readmissions from hospital from residents on IDDSI diets. How did we translate those IDDSI diets to our diets? So that was like our aha moment. We knew we had to go with IDDSI. So, you know, all organizations will have some sort of minced and puree textures. So that's a given, you know. But we had our own soft texture as well, and with our own definition of soft. And we realized it's not going to really work. We had IDDSI available to us. The resource is there. The definition is there. Let's change our soft to easy to chew. So that was for us, in a way, an easy transition. And IDDSI always, you know, allowed for homes to implement the textures that worked for them. It wasn't all or nothing. You can choose what would work for your organization. So we knew we were going to go easy to chew, but soft and bite size, it just doesn't work for us right now. We don't have the resources to be able to chop the food into that particle size and have consistency. So we said, okay, we'll skip the soft and bite size, but we're still thinking IDDSI. Okay. Then the next struggle was bread, right? Bread is a common struggle for many people. How do we handle bread? We know that the IDDSI minced and moist doesn't allow for regular bread, but we always had that on our minced texture diet. So we developed a multi-year plan. We are implementing IDDSI this year in our 2026 menu. Our first home is going live in just a couple of weeks. And we decided to keep with a mince with soft bread diet as a 1-year interim diet. And at the same time, implement a minced and moist diet. We figured the 1 year will give us a chance to reevaluate and reassess all our residents and see where we can slot them into an IDDSI diet. Because to be honest, we didn't really know our current soft transitioning to easy to chew will be more easy to chew. So maybe some of our current minced, we're calling it minced with soft bread residents, will be able to move to an easy to chew. We don't really know until we actually implement the diet, even though we've done so much testing. But when it's really actual, you know, you're assessing a resident in the dining room and wanting to see, can they manage that easy to chew? You don't know until you really test with the food. So that's how we kind of decided what our textures would be, where we were going with our textures. So I really have to say that the IDDSI website and the audit tools are really your guiding principles or your guiding document of how to test the food, where to go with it, how to slot it into the different levels. So we spent a lot of time testing. We were very, very fortunate that in our grocery contract, we are with Cisco right now. We have the resources of a dedicated chef and dietitian. So 3 of us worked together testing about 900 recipes and foods that we had on our current menu. We kept a spreadsheet. We kind of said, okay, where does it slot in? Where do we put it? Does it pass? And if it doesn't pass, why doesn't it pass? Was it cooked too long? Was it with dry heat instead of moist heat? Did we do something wrong in the processing? Was it over-processed? And we really did a lot of detailed notes in a document that we kept. We were also very fortunate that our homes were able to help us. So even though corporately I'm the menu planner, I work in one of the homes as well. And we went to one of our homes where we worked with the cook. They had an extra steam table in the kitchen. They had a hot holding cart, and we mimicked what would happen from the kitchen to the servery. We would hold food as long as it would be held normally. We would put it in the steam table as long as it would normally be in the steam table, and then we would test it. So a couple of things we revised. The IDDSI audit tool says to test at point of service in 15 minutes and 30 minutes. Well, we skipped the 15 minutes because we were testing multiple items at one time. And we said, well, if it doesn't pass at 30, it's not going to be put on the menu, right? It doesn't work. So we kind of tested at the time where we would serve, and then we would let it sit in the steam table. Then we would test at 30 minutes. Also on the IDDSI website, there's a resource from the United Kingdom. The Dorset Healthcare Group has a kind of modified audit tool that you can use that is shorter. It's more concise. And we're going to be using that one as well for testing on a day-to-day basis. So I'll give you some examples. For example, I'm sorry, I'm just looking down at my notes so I don't forget it to tell you anything. For example, broccoli is something that we tested. Okay, so first time it wasn't steamed long enough, so it wasn't really soft and easy to chew. It didn't pass the fork test. Another brand we tested had a lot of stem in it. Didn't really pass. So we had to go to florets. So sometimes the food itself, you might be looking at different products or different vendors to try and get the right food to pass. Okay. The other thing we did was we tried to align our regular texture and easy to chew as much as possible because we knew the challenge of having multiple containers on a steam table. You don't have enough space necessarily for everything. So if you have one food item for regular, a different food item for easy to chew, then you need a mince, then you need a pureed, it takes up a lot of real estate on a steam table. So we look to try and align those two textures as much as possible. The other thing we realized in our testing was some of the foods that we had been serving, we kind of knew in the back of our mind weren't really right. But without the having the confidence of the IDDSI tools behind us, we were afraid to make certain decisions. Once we knew the criteria of the foods allowed and not allowed, and we had the testing results behind us, we felt more confident where to slot in the food. So I'll give you some other examples. We were mincing our fruit, right? So we know that in order to get a minced particle size, the appropriate size, you will have to put it in a grinder. If you put it in a RoboCoupe, you're going to get different particle size by the way the blade goes around. So we weren't able to put the fruit in a grinder because it would be too watery. So we said, okay, we can't mince fruit anymore. It's going to be served regular or pureed. And we feel comfortable with that decision because we know that it passes the IDDSI test and it's appropriate. Okay. In terms of recipes, we focused on looking on how are we actually cooking the food. We had a chef with us, the chef from Cisco helping us, and we focused on, I know Jenny will probably speak to this as well, what did we bake it too long? Does the rational setting have to be changed so it's more steam and less dry heat? Those are all the things that could affect your recipe and affect your testing. All the recipes that we're passing, we tag now. So in our software system, we'll know that the IDDSI recipe is appropriate for that level. It has a tag and it has a description on what are the guidelines for that and the characteristics of that level for the cooks to have as a reference.
So Natalie, we're bumping up on that 10 minutes we talked about.
Okay. Okay, I'll do two more quick things to tell you then. Okay, we did a lot of education. Okay, education is key. We had nutrition manager and dietitian meetings where we talked about IDDSI. We had a monthly newsletter that we shared. We always had an IDDSI page. We have a lot of written resources for the homes to be able to educate their staff. We did a lot of presentations to our head office, family council, resident council, family newsletters, a roadshow. We're doing a roadshow where we did IDDSI testing for a group of the managers and the food service staff. And so all that is really key. I guess I'm out of time. I could share more later if you have some specific questions.
I'm pretty sure based on the questions we have, you're going to be able to share a lot more. Just, okay. I may have missed it. Did you say how many buildings and how many residents you're implementing this with?
10 homes and over 2,600 residents.
Okay, so that's good perspective for people, but wonderful to hear how you're navigating and just showing that IDDSI is a framework and an aspirational goal and things, and you don't have to just turn off what you're doing now one day and turn on IDDSI the next day. You can walk over to it, and that's part of the process as well. So at this point, we just want to take a moment and ask those of you who have signed in for this, just a quick little poll question that Alan's going to put up, asking us, sharing what stage of IDDSI implementation you're in. So maybe the panelists can have a little better idea as to where you are and try to answer your questions a little more appropriately there. So I think we're going to have this up for another, I don't know, 20 or 30 seconds or so. Alan should be monitoring it to see um, how many people are still answering. But I did appreciate the introduction quite a bit, Natalie. Like I said, I'm looking at the questions people submitted, and what you were talking about was right in line with what the questions are.
Perfect.
Thanks, John. Maybe we can give it another 30 seconds. Seems like lots
Okay.
of folks are still pitching in. Maybe while people do that, I'll just mention that as Natalie shared with us, all the resources on the IDDSI website are free, and you can access those at idsi.org/resources, and I've included that link in the chat box.
And one of the key resources that people don't know about is that we have what are called reference groups from around the globe, and each reference group has developed things kind of, it's not different than IDDSI, but like the Canadian group has developed things with a Canada focus to it. And you don't have to be limited to just looking at the Canadian ones, because you'll notice Natalie said that she found something from the UK group that they're going to use in their implementation. So it's all kind of open source, and you can grab the resources and adapt those for your own particular situation.
Yeah, and if anyone is interested in joining a reference group, shoot us a message on the contact us page on the website, and we'll get in touch with you.
Yep.
Okay, I think we are good with the poll, so I'm going to end it
Okay.
now, and I'm going to share the results. So here you go.
Awesome. So we have kind of like straight across the board,
Mm.
other than implementing foods only. But it looks like a good, we've got 13% researching, 7% implementing, 17% mapping out, 22% in the reviewing stage, 9% have done drinks only, and we have a third of us almost that have implemented both. Well, congratulations on that. And so now that we have that background and we had the introduction, I'm going to start with the questions that were submitted during the registration process. So one of the questions we got is that somebody's working with a large facility that happens to be Jewish, so they have kosher rules to deal with, and over 1,000 patients, and they tried to do minced and moist, but it didn't feel very practical for them unless they have extra staff, extra equipment. So let's start with Ruba, and I think all the panelists can throw in a little thoughts on how you deal with a large scale implementation like that and what you've seen.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely give some insight. I think just so could you just repeat the question one more time? Because I heard the part of it, but then it got cut off at the end.
This person said that they're in a Jewish facility, so they have to keep kosher. They have over 1,000 patients. They tried to do minced and moist, but it didn't feel practical because of the extra staff and extra equipment needed.
I see. Okay, for sure. I think that's definitely a very kind of normal topic that definitely happens when it comes to um, talking about just serving for over 1,000 patients, especially when it comes to like something like that. But I think it's important to understand that there are, especially when it comes to such a specific group with specifically, let's say, Jewish or I guess specific dietary restrictions, it's becomes a little bit more kind of harder to, I guess, be more specific with the Etsy perspective as well. I think it's always good to start somewhere because when it comes to such a big group, you want to basically kind of focus on the basics of the things that you can try to get to implement. With that, it not necessarily has to be kind of like a one push for all. I think given that I'm in a corporate level with that, I think it's something that we kind of work in the background of things where we implement those recipes and kind of have them with our own culinary group decided and tested as well. But then when it comes to hands-on practice, we try to get those feedback from sites with such big numbers to understand whether these things also work when we test them at the corporate level. And this is where it's always a conversation and discussion that we have. So we always try to kind of make sure that there's always a collaborative approach towards these things and see where is it that we kind of deal with those, I guess, hardships that can happen when it's such a big group. Because this is when I would always mention that recipes, as well as part of like testing and making sure it's IDDSI compliant, and along with the flavor and the nutritional operationally wise, is also something that definitely you would want to look at. Because when it comes to sites with such big numbers, this is the one thing they also focus on, because they are creating recipes and they're creating different textures and different diets with that, where it really is a burden. So just trying to kind of look at and making the recipes as simple as possible to make sure it also meets the requirement and to be operationally more compliant as well. But I believe, Natalie, I think you just mentioned you've worked with such a big number as well, and you are doing this IDDSI implementation for more than, I think you mentioned more than 1,000 residents already, or 10 homes. So I'm not sure if you have more perspective into that, if you want to add anything.
Sure. Thanks, Rupa. This organization is likely already making minced food, because that is required in any organization. You're doing a mince, you're doing a pureed. So they probably would have to look at their equipment, right? If their equipment can handle that volume, I think that's the main thing. IDDSI really comes back to equipment. You have to have the right equipment to be able to process the food correctly. So it doesn't matter if it is a kosher organization or not. The only probably challenge they have is they cannot buy any already minced products or pureed products. They have to produce in-house. So if you're producing in-house, then you just have to make sure you have the equipment that can handle that load, whether it be maybe it has to have a larger motor, increased speed, maybe it's 2 pieces of equipment that are going to be mincing. Really, that's really what it comes down to.
Jenny, any thoughts?
I do have some thoughts.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the role is of the person that submitted the question, but it could be perhaps that you need to do some education to somebody in a decision-making role about why it's so important that maybe you do need some new equipment. And that could take some time. It could be a capital expense. But so if you're in a kitchen role, a culinary role, and you are really firm about implementing IDDSI, it might be up to you to get a few champions and a few other departments and just say, we really need to do this, and this is why, and start there to see, if you can get your hands on some new equipment that way. And secondly, I would say, again, like Natalie said, you're probably already doing some minced recipes. I would bet that many of your recipes already meet some minced and moist guidelines. So you probably are already partially doing it. You just don't know. And then perhaps you can take some of the recipes that just need minor tweaks to create a minced and moist recipe. If you can audit some of your recipes, and there could be some recipes where you could be serving the gravy on top of the meat when it's minced, but if you just incorporate the gravy and now it's going to be minced and moist. So there could be these small things that you could be already partway there, is what I'm trying to say. And I think John alluded to the fact before that IDDSI is not an all or nothing, it's a process. So if you can just do some recipes, and you already are maybe doing some with a few small tweaks, you can kind of start it that way. So I know it's probably really daunting and challenging for you, because you do have the kosher aspect and you have so many meals to produce. But I think if you can take these small steps, those might be little baby steps that you can take to get you started.
Well, since everybody kind of brought up equipment, we did get a question in the Q&A. Somebody asked for equipment recommendations for the minced texture, so that you have a nice consistent texture. Any thoughts from our panelists about what equipment seems to work the best?
Well, in our homes, I can speak to what we have. We have some homes that have a tabletop grinder. So there's that type of equipment. I'm not sure if it's Hobart. I don't remember, to be honest. And we have others that use the mixers, and they have the attachment, the grinder attachment that goes onto the mixer on the top. So I've seen both work. You just have to make sure that the plate size, the holes are the right size that comes out to the between the tines of a fork, right? The 4 millimeter size or less, so that you don't get a plate with very large holes in it. It has to be small enough that when you're extruding the meat or the vegetables, it's the right size.
Mm-hmm.
And in our testing, we also use like a Blixer. We know a lot of people use a Vitamix. And I think something that I would add to that is if you are using it a lot, and you should probably do this anyways, regardless of IDDSI, is a lot of people forget to make sure they get their blade sharpened or to replace their blades. Because when you are doing whatever, using it all the time, and you're testing your IDDSI recipe and it passes, and then a few months later your blades are getting dull and you're not getting the same results. So it's kind of important to schedule that in. I think a lot of people kind of forget about that. So that's just a little tip, something I learned along my way.
I had my fingers crossed over here to remind me to say, make sure your blades are sharpened in case none of you said that. So yeah. Ruba, anything to add on the equipment question?
I think just similar to what Natalie and Jenny said, I think those are some of the equipments that we also use when it comes to testing. But I think just one thing to keep in mind is, if you want to start, you could also start with just what you have, the existing tools that are available. I know sometimes when people think like, oh, I need to buy new equipment to make this happen. But really, realistically, if you have, just a blender, a good working blender, the blades are sharpened, just like Jenny mentioned. I think you could start the process and get something done without really having to think. And then you could think about adding later options of tools that could be more helpful and could get you better results as you progress through this.
I would just say when we did some things around here, we actually had to go and buy the same food processor for everybody so that we could eliminate that variability.
Yeah.
So that everybody was using the same piece of equipment as we were doing recipe development. And then it's obvious kind of, but it's always important to make sure that you're scaling your recipes for the size of the equipment you have, because you can have it too big or you can have it too small, and both of them lead to problems in the processing. So that's always my big tip on equipment, other than sharp blades. Let's see. Let's talk bread. I mean, we have a bunch of questions around bread. Somebody says pureed bread is a challenge. It's not widely agreed upon by most speech therapists. What can we do? Somebody in the chat mentioned that they have problems with bread. They're allowing bread for soft and bite-sized six, minced and moist. We do not have an easy to chew bread. So let's just hear your thoughts on bread and what you're doing.
I'll go first.
All right.
This is, the main hot topic when people talk about IDDSI. And the first thing that I'll say is kind of what Natalie alluded to, what they were doing is don't panic, because people were saying when we first heard about IDDSI, oh, well, I have all these people on a minced diet and they're having bread today with like a minced filling out. Tomorrow we're going to do IDDSI and they can't have bread anymore. And, this causes a lot of stress and panic. A, what are we going to do? B, how are we going to present this to the residents and the families? They're going to freak out. Well, the first thing that I would say was just, if they're eating bread safely today, they can probably still be eating it tomorrow. So just try, like Natalie said, I think you were taking the year and getting your residents assessed. So you're still going to have some people who can't have it, but it might not be, as dire as people are thinking. So I think that's one thing to kind of just put out there. And with regards to, what we have done is we actually developed a gel bread recipe that we have been using, and some of our clients are using as well. So it does take a little bit of, work and prep, but it does create a product that can actually be picked up and made into a sandwich. And then you can also puree it for, the pureed. So minced and moist can have it and pureed as well. And it's one of those things, some people, want to use it, some people don't, but we have had feedback that some of the residents don't even realize that it's not, regular bread. That is a solution that we have right now. And I do know that there's a lot of R&D with different manufacturers and suppliers going on, because this is such a big challenge for people.
Natalie?
Yeah. So I did speak about how we kind of decided how to approach bread. As Jenny said, we are using bread because residents who can manage it will still manage it today. We will do a individualized approach. So as we eliminate our transition diet of mince with soft bread, we'll slot people into maybe minced and moist, and we might say allow bread, or we might say, give you another example, pureed. Even we have some pureed people who can eat bread and we allow it. So we'll have to individualize it. We decided not to go with the gelled bread. We felt we were making so many changes with this menu to begin with. It was going to be overwhelming for staff in terms of all the changes in production and for service. Who knows, maybe we will do it in the future. I don't know. But at this point, we're not. And we're buying a pureed bread product that we're using for our pureed bread.
Ruba?
Yeah, I think the bread is just like Jenny mentioned, it's a situation that we still looking at and still struggling with, and it's totally understandable to kind of feel there is no really a solution for this. So similar to what they say, I think there is, there are also like products out there. A lot of suppliers are now opening their eyes into Etsy and trying to, I guess, create products that could work in terms of creating pureed bread with that. But I think you can always also, I guess, when it comes to menuing or, putting recipes out there, it's also good to kind of look at other alternatives that maybe give that, starch texture, but not necessarily a bread product. I know it's not, I guess, something that residents would not like, but it could be a start from there until there's a solution that you can find as well. And trust me, once you kind of roll the ball out there, I think you start thinking and there's a lot of ideas, and you start looking at the chemistry of things and trying to see what could work to make this pureed product bread happen as well.
Yep. I know we've done some work on developing bread recipes. We have one that we like, but you find the same thing. It works for some facilities, it works for some people, and it works in some situations. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of options out there. Whether it's pureed bread mixes or a gelled or a recipe or even just you have liberal diets and these residents are okay with it when you individualize the diet. One person did comment that they have a very liberal diets in their facilities and they want their bread. And their speech therapist is very attentive to their needs. So you can't change IDDSI. IDDSI is what it is, but you can have a liberalized diet order for an individual. And that's always one of the ways that it's dealt with, especially in cases where you have people who already are eating bread. And if you flip the switch to IDDSI, all of a sudden now they can't. I mean, that the idea here is really that IDDSI gives a framework and a language to the diets, but we're still trying to give people the options to eat as much as possible, right? Okay, so next question. Let's talk a little bit about flavor, appearance, and presentation. We have a few different questions. I'll just kind of, I'm going to read these three questions and then I'll let you guys react to them because they're all very similar, but they're different. So, somebody said how to implement purees that contain the right texture and no lumps without the need to use commercial thickeners or breadcrumbs. When working with pureed mashed potato, the challenge is to make it not too starchy. How do you get the right texture? What techniques or ingredients to help improve the flavor and appearance for levels 4 to 6? What training approaches? Any tips for maintaining the appeal and color of minced vegetables? Keeping rice moist, soft, and not sticky for a minced texture. Keeping cream of wheat for pureed texture. Not become a sticky blob of glue. So there's a lot in there, but it's all about presentation and flavor. So I thought I'd just lump them together and see what we get out of that.
It's a lot of
Uh,
questions.
yep. It looked better when I skimmed it to just throw it all together, but then as I read it out loud, I was like, ooh, there's a lot here. Jenny?
Yeah, so I mean, I can tackle a few of those. So, a full disclosure, I often do use thickeners when I am testing my food, but there are other ways that you can do it. I mean, one way is just to change the regular recipe. That sometimes can help the texture when you do texture modify it. You could add something like pureed legumes into it. That often helps. And then have added nutritional value. You can add something like instant potato flakes that can be used as a thickener, like some cornstarch, arrowroot, depending on what it is, like a Greek yogurt, something like that. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. However, the one thing that I would say that I've found, and I'm very cognizant of when I'm testing, is when you're working with seniors, you don't want to add something that is going to increase the portion size of the original dish. So you have to be really careful there, which is why I do like the thickeners. You don't really need too much, and it doesn't really change the original dish, like the integrity of the flavors as well. From a culinary perspective, I'm always, wanting the texture modified dish to taste the same. It should taste the same with the exception of it doesn't have the contrast of the crunchiness in there. And in fact, often another thing when people are talking about how you maintain the flavor, I personally find the flavor intensifies when you texture modify, especially when you get down to that pureed level. Any of those ingredients, it really just intensifies. So that's something actually there have been sometimes I pureed something. I'm like, wow, this is like really strong now, like sauerkraut or, pickled beets or something like that. So I think the only issue might be with flavor if you are adding something that doesn't add any nutritional value or flavor like water. Really avoid doing that because that is going to make the portion size bigger. It's going to change the nutritional value and it's going to change the flavor of it. So I always try to add, something that's going to add flavor, milk, cream, broth, juice, fruit juice, gravy, things like that. And as for presentation, that's also like a really big challenge, especially when you're having to measure out all the portion sizes and make sure that they're getting the right portion. But there is things that you can do. I mean, you can use molds, and I'm not talking about the shape molds. I mean, you could use those, but can have open a whole nother can of worms. But even ring molds, you can mark them on the inside so you know how much you need to pipe in for a certain amount. This is going to give you, a half a cup. You can use dishes within the plate, so it create like a smaller dish, like a little ramekin on the plate, so it's creating contrast, so it's not just like a lump or a scoop. You can use some piping as well. So there are some little tips and tricks there, like different colored plates, things like that. But definitely this is another thing like bread, where people are like, okay, I've got my recipes, the recipes work, but you're not getting the same plate appearance. So that's something that depending on your labor as well. But those are a few kind of tricks that people use. For rice, I think an important thing to do is make sure you rinse the rice a lot. That really gets rid before you cook it. That gets rid of a lot of starchiness. And something I found works to bind it is maybe use like a cream sauce. You can use like a purchased one that's light. That kind of maybe helps it not be too sticky, but it really depends what kind of rice you use and what else you put in it. Sometimes adding something like a shredded zucchini can help, like to add some moisture along with the cream base. So it's just like trying different things to try to get that flavor, that texture that you need. And I think they mentioned cream of wheat as well. I think that and this brings up something for me that's really important, not just with texture modified foods when you're holding them, it's all foods. Oftentimes I see and have seen in the past, people just crank up the steam table to the highest heat because they're like, okay, it's safe, but it's not necessary. It just needs to be at a safe temperature. And the higher you crank it up, the more the food quality disintegrates over time, which, for a regular dish, that's not great. But now when you're talking about IDDSI and you need it to be the same pass the test after it's been held, if you can hold it at the lowest possible temperature that's safe, that's really going to help from those things, from like the liquid evaporating and then becoming gloopy and gloppy and not passing IDDSI anymore. That's something that I really feel strongly about, instead of just cranking that steam table up to 200 degrees. So that's something that you can try. And cream of wheat, it's like when you're doing a test for a soup or a beverage, you want it to start at the level that's like the lowest possible level, because it is going to thicken a little bit. So it's got to be past the test, but you got to kind of give it, you might need to make your cream of wheat a little bit runnier than you would regularly while it will still pass the test. So it's just like a lot of playing around with it, your original recipe, because your original recipe might be great now for regular and to pass when you serve it, but you have to think about it passing the 30 minutes after it's served as well as it being held. That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm sure.
Ruba, any comments?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, it is a heavy question, but I can just add on some things similar to what Jenny said. I think one thing that like I know that helped us is we created kind of like a flow chart that kind of showed us the patterns that we've seen through testing a lot of recipes by now. So let's say if something happens, then you would kind of put an option of like what to try to kind of get it to the minced or puree texture, any texture. And that helps with like kind of creating consistency because honestly, you could test a recipe up to 3 times and it might still fail. And that's, kind of part of the process, but it's good to kind of have something that you can follow through. I know, like, for example, the what's it called, like the starchy foods or like glue-like textures food. Those are like one of the most challenging categories, and I think it's important to look at it just from like a chemistry perspective. What is it that you could use to get rid of that glue? So, for example, using, fat or maybe like adding a small amount of fat or oil. It could be like 1 teaspoon, let's say, per serving, or maybe even less than that. That could help reduce some of that starchy stickiness as well. Or sometimes it could be acidity, whether that was using some of the lemon juice or anything like that, that could help get, or fight that starchiness back a little bit. And similar to what Jenny said is you also don't want to use, water to dilute things. It might reach the right texture, but you want to also look at it from a nutritional point of view. So for example, using cream-based soups to texture some of these recipes or dressings, for example, when it comes to texturing salads as well, that also could really help a lot to getting better flavor, better nutritionals, and also getting I guess the texture properly as well. So looking at it from that point, and to Jenny's point, I totally agree about the beans and legumes. Those really do help as well a lot. So definitely it is something you can definitely try with things where you find that are not easy to puree smoothly. We found that those legumes, when we use them for a lot of recipes, it did help as well. And in terms of like presentation, yeah, like I think we have some, like, I think it just depends on what the sites you're working with, because yeah, to Jenny's point, the molding is takes a lot of labor. There's also piping bags that I've heard about some sites using. And honestly, it could be also just like as simple as just cleaning the edges of the plate before serving to make it look a little bit better, because especially when you're scooping different sites out, things could just go all over the place. So just making sure, it's a little more cleaner. That it's very simple, but it could honestly help when the resident is getting served the food as well. So yes, those are some things that I think are to kind of add to Jenny's point as well.
Natalie?
Okay, I'll just touch on a couple of points that weren't mentioned already. One was the question about how to get a puree smooth. And again, I go back to the equipment and to John's point about making sure your blade is sharp. You're going to use a Blixer or a RoboCoupe or something along those lines. So just to process it long enough and maybe adding a little bit of liquid or fat to get it smooth. And not just going around and then taking it out and portioning it, like, go in with a spoon and stir it around and make sure everything has been smoothed out. In terms of the mashed potato question, we actually have been using up till now fresh peeled potatoes to make mashed potatoes, and we are going to go away from that because we found it was inconsistent. Depending on time of year, the type of potato, the eyes in the potato, it just doesn't work to give us a consistent mashed potato that would pass. So we are going to go to a rehydrated type of potato. And the other point was in terms of the cream of wheat or any food that you find is getting thick by the time you're ready to serve it, the food service worker who is serving the food also has a responsibility. So it can start off in the kitchen really well, but as it's held or it's sitting, it might thicken, it might get a bit of a crust, it might dry out a little bit. So we're training our food service workers also to be an eye before it gets to the resident. So maybe they have to stir it again. Maybe they have to remove a little bit of the crust. Maybe they can adjust by adding a little bit of moisture, and stir it up again, because the foods will change, and we won't necessarily be able to have it perfect the whole way through, but we can adjust as we go along. So we're going to be training our staff to do that as well.
Yep, starches are very difficult because the longer you hold them, the more starch they release, whether it's rice or pasta or mashed potatoes or whatever. And so it's that attentiveness as well as having some sauces or oils or things like that that just help keep them from getting sticky, is always a good thing. We did have a question or two about how long does it take to implement IDDSI? And I know, Natalie, you're going to say, well, it's taken us like
Mhm.
7 or 8 years. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
but you
don't
know,
get discouraged. Go bit by bit. Even if you start by everyone's making a puree. So maybe start with your puree texture. Check it, do your testing, change your equipment. Then you know that, from a quality point of view, you've got your puree down pat. And you can
so
just slowly implement.
so you said, and I just this is kind of related.
Yeah.
You said you've tested like 900 recipes. How many of those recipes did you find fell into an IDDSI category versus things you had to completely redo?
The majority did. I can't tell you the percentage, but based on the testing, we made decisions not to include certain items, like, for example, asparagus. We had frozen asparagus on our menu, but it doesn't, you can't really cut it easily with a fork, right?
Yep.
It's stringy. And because we were trying to align our regular and our easy to chew as much as possible, we said, okay, we're going to remove asparagus for now. We had to try and make a manageable menu from a production point of view and from a service point of view. So some things might have passed a certain level, but we made a decision not to include it. Corn is another one, right?
Yeah.
What do you do with corn?
So
It's
so
okay
what?
for regular, but it doesn't really pass easy to chew,
Yep.
right? It doesn't pass the test. So we're making certain decisions for now based on this is our first go with food, and then we can reevaluate.
Yeah, you can always come back and add things back.
Yeah.
Jenny, what are you seeing for implementation timelines, and what do you think your clients are finding in their menus? How much are they having to change? Because I know you said something about it you're already doing it, you just might not know it, I think was the phrase you
Yeah,
used.
yes. Well, I mean, I think from, conception to being on the journey, which we'll all be on forever, really, um, a couple years, really. If you're just starting out, I think you need to give yourself a couple years. You got to start out with educating yourself and educating, everyone in your home. And that's really the first step. I think for what percentage has to change, it really depends on what diets they're using, what kind of products they're using. Some clients we have are using more purchase products, and then some are doing more homemade. So it's you get the whole spectrum. But I think I really, really love what Natalie said about we're taking asparagus off for now, because that's kind of the approach that we've been taking as well. Because when we started, we had, we already had our menu, and we're like, we just have to test all this stuff, see how it fits in, and then release our next menu. So we were like, okay, put this on the shelf for now. It doesn't mean we're giving up. It doesn't mean we're never going to put it back. But I think that's a great way to look at it, because otherwise it's so discouraging. Like, we had a timeline where we have to test X amount of recipes in 6 months. So something didn't work. We're like, okay, we'll put that aside for now. We'll replace that on the menu for now. And
For
I think
now.
that's a great way to look at it, because like we were saying, R&D is happening, suppliers and manufacturers, or someone can reach out to you and say, hey, I learned how to do this, and you could try this, right? So not to look at your menu and say, oh, all this stuff isn't working. Concentrate on what is working, on the positives, and just go from there.
Ruba, what are you seeing?
I personally, when I joined Aramark, the whole Etsy project has already started, like I would say about like 4 or 5 years ago. So I kind of came in with the program running, but definitely, it was a struggle at the start because similar to kind of what Jenny and Natalie has said, you're testing a lot of recipes, especially when you're starting, you're trying to like get at least the important recipes to pass. And sometimes that's okay to not work. And it was an ongoing project. And right now, if you look at, like, if I were to look at like the past recipes that we've had versus now, we have way more recipes that we've passed by now with all Etsy textures. And
Mm-hmm.
they all were because we kind of looked into improving them, looked into what ingredients we could use to kind of make it happen, blending it with other ingredients that worked, that were able to get a texture with things that are very hard to get it texturized. So I think it's a work in progress, and it's normal for it to take years to reach a really good amount of recipes where you're satisfied. But I think it's just important to start somewhere, even if it was just like with simple recipes and just like we mentioned previously, you could be already have been doing it, and so just looking at that perspective is always important as well.
And I think the comment that I'll throw in on this one is that we see um, it really depends on the reason you're implementing is how long it's going to take. So people who are taking the time and have the time and are doing a very thoughtful one, you're going to see that 18-month to 2-year timeline. We've seen some places where they've had some regulatory issues and they go all out very quickly. And so it can be a few months, but it's not going to be as well done. And everybody's not going to be educated as much. Um, and so that's always something we see. And usually I hear people say 2/3 to 3/4 of their recipes are probably on Etsy already. It's just they got to figure out which category it's on, or like Jenny said, you make the decision to like mix in the sauce rather than put it on top.
Yeah, no, I
So it's just
agree.
a simple modification like that will help you meet those things. I
Yeah, and
see.
I think just one thing to add as well, like I think we also keep focusing on getting the recipes passed, but also one thing to keep in mind is educating your staff and making them understand why is this important and how to get things right and what are those textures to begin with is also a very important foundation that will be built on other, recipes that you could pass later on, because that education is really the foundation of the start of this whole program or project that you want to start. So definitely highly recommend, starting with the resources and educations first as well.
Well,
I'd just like to
I'm
add to that. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
that's okay. Go
I
ahead.
just going to say, like, I know a lot of people say the people maybe in the back of the house in the kitchen don't have any clinical experience. And so they are like, well, they're not going to understand. And I think that to Ruba's point, everyone that works in healthcare cares about their patients and residents a lot.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you explain to them in very simple terms, what dysphagia is and why we need to do this, because things are a choking hazard, we're trying to improve their quality of life, you're going to get buy-in. That's what I've seen in my experience. These people care, they're caring people. And so sometimes people put that up as a barrier to not change or not doing IDDSI. But if you just simply explain it that way in some very simple, you can choke when they're swallowing, they're more they're more likely to get their buy-in and they're okay, well, what do we need to do? You know,
Yep.
I think that's really important, like on a human level.
So I think that was actually a great comment to kind of bring this to a close. I mean, we have a whole bunch more questions. Um, and I want to thank everybody for participating as, the people who are here as participants as well as the panel members. I do want to put in a plug and say everybody who's on here, we all volunteer for the Canadian IDDSI reference group. And that's how we got here today. And that's why we get to share our knowledge. We're always looking for more people to help us out so we can get more messages out and we can produce more content for people who have questions. So feel free to reach out to IDDSI um, and we will get you on the committee. Alan, do you have any final housekeeping things you need to do for us?
Just a big Big thank you to Jenny, Natalie, Ruba, and John for sharing your expertise with the IDDSI community today. We love these webinars. We love when we just get to chat about everything that is going on in the IDDSI world and how everyone has a different approach to it. Lots of questions about how to access these resources. So IDDSI.org is your source of truth. So please do visit our website. Everything there is free to download and to use. You're encouraged to visit our website. And let me just share one last plug here. We have an ongoing event. It's a US IDDSI virtual conference. It started last week. We have 5 more sessions, the one coming up on February 25th. The registration is still open, and that is eligible for some CEUs. So you can find all the information about the virtual conference on IDDSI.org. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.